Boom! Welcome back to the RMP, guys. I'm Zachary, your host of this fucking podcast on Instagram at The Muscle Hamster, which, I'm questioning maybe changing that to get a little more specific to the brand. But we are here to question the mess, make some rebel actions, and start living life on our own terms. Now, how the fuck is everybody? How's everybody doing? There has been... I know that I missed an episode last week. That is totally my fault. I will fess up to that. I've let things definitely get in the way, but there's obviously also a lot going on for me. I'm trying to assess and schedule and make sure that what comes up in the future for the podcast and the brand itself is substantially better and more consistent. So we're all on this crazy journey trying to figure life out. I think the biggest secret that nobody wants to admit is that we don't know what the fuck we're doing. That most of the time we don't know what the fuck we're doing. And it might give you a little bit of satisfaction and relief knowing that if we can allow ourselves to think this, to legitimately think this, that maybe we'll give ourselves a little bit more credit and maybe we'll stop giving ourselves such a hard time. But there has been a lot going on. I went to a comedy show from a comedian that I absolutely love, and laughed my ass off in a way that I haven't for a long time. I'm getting ready to move, which actually is tomorrow. The day that this is actually coming out. But the episode I had today was the 2.0 that I promised you guys for at the interview with Jenn Dees. Oh my god. So my mind's wrapped around so much about tomorrow that I can't keep my head straight. But this is the 2.0 with her. The first episode with her, if you heard it, Jenn Dees, the physical trainer, we talked about her story, and almost the whole podcast was based around her story. So if you got a little bit intimate with that, you figure out who she was. This is the part where we actually dug into a lot of things around her knowledge and expertise. And we talked a lot about the potential of nutrition and physical health in the medical system. It sounds like it's something that she's going to get into the medical field. And we talked a lot about the methods and the techniques and the importance of everything based around our physical and nutritional health, diet, and what that means, and the ways to go about it, and the ways to go about physical health, and the differences in the athletics and the angles to come from. So there's a lot. This is the first episode that I've had that was over 2 hours. It was a lot. There's a bunch of little tiny nuggets in there for anybody that really wants to soak up this type of information. If you're already a really good personal trainer or in the nutritional field, then fucking yes, you already get it. This isn't for you. But for anybody that's a hobbyist, for anybody that's maybe a gym rat, for anybody that just likes to hear the conversations around these specific ideas and these specific fields, then you're gonna love this. It's gonna be fucking absolutely fantastic. But I hope everybody's doing really well. I am on edge with so many things right now, and I really hope to just make this podcast better and the brand better and the content better. And there's a couple things that I've been legitimately waiting for, which is a very, very bad excuse, but at the same time, I'm so close to getting them that I think things will flow, and I hope that you guys can hold me to that, because it's very important for what we're trying to do here, for the questions that we're trying to create, and the content and the community that I've been trying to create for a couple years now. It's kind of coming down to a couple situations that sound like excuses, and I hope that they're not. And finally having these things in my hands to where I can make the progress that I've really wanted to with the RMP and the question everything motto and the whole idea. And so if you've been hesitant to be a part of this community, I hope that you hang on. I really want to bring a lot more, and it's coming soon. It's coming soon, I promise. So without any further ado, let's get into this interview with Jenn Dees. This is the 2.0. I hope you guys enjoy the hell out of it. Stay strong, stay development-minded. Yeah. So where are you at with everything? I mean, because after the last time we talked, I was like, oh, you're still in your education, right? Like I mean, I know that you're probably continuing education, but weren't you? I can't remember what I was reading off of your profile. You're also in the medical field, kind of. Is that what I remember?
Yeah, I would really like to go to PA school.
PAs, okay.
That's something that I'm really interested in. It's either that or I'll end up doing like MRI. I do like that too. PA school is really competitive, and so I've just been a little bit more careful about of my workload that I take on, because basically, if you don't have like a 3.85 or above, you ain't getting into PA school. So, and even then, like the lower your GPA is from a 4.0, the less of a chance you have. So it's really important that I am on top of my shit and have a reasonable load so I can get all A's. So my backup plan basically with that, as far as like where my degree's at, is I can go radiology, MRI, and do that instead if I feel like, if I don't get accepted into PA school, or I just decide to go a different route, like I can do that. But honestly, my idea with that is, though, I would really like to bring, I really hate how doctors go about things. So I would really like to bring my knowledge to the table and my experience, with nutrition and working out. So when people come in with problems like that, I can guide them a little bit better than a typical like MD, Because
you've got depth in areas where it's going to aid in that injury recovery, right?
Yeah. Well, and a lot of doctors give really bad nutrition advice because it's based off of, they get really kind of simple nutrition training in school. And it's basically like, here's how to not be obese and here's how to not have diabetes. Like it's not really anything much more than that. So like when people come to you and they need to lose weight, and they, I've heard so many different things. Like my doctor said, I can only eat this. My doctor said I have to do keto. My doctor said I can't eat bread ever again. Like, it's the shit like that gets me. I'm just always like, that's not real advice, but okay,
Yeah.
And so I'd really like to be able to bring some of what I know to the medical field.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a problem.
No, I was, so I just, I've been a skeptic, but also a supporter of Paul Saladino. Have you seen his stuff? The carnivore MD guy?
Oh, okay. A little bit.
Yeah. And, I like to watch his stuff because I like to process and I like to question, obviously. But the last post he put up today, I think, was he was talking about how much he learned in the medical field. He's a fucking MD, but he said they don't teach shit for nutrition, and everything that he's learned about the nutrition beyond that, he said, like he wants to be able to help change the medical field because he thinks that that's where it needs to start. He said, I think that the medical system needs to be based less and less around the prescription of drugs and like knowing what our fixes are based around our symptoms, and start with the basics of physical and nutritional health. He said that's where like the medical field should have started. And he wants to be able to help turn that around. But it's like, fuck yeah, man. Like after everything I've learned and the stuff that I've heard from you and stuff that I heard from all these other people, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I'm very passionate about that too. And what you would call that in like terms is what we fail as like US is we concentrate on treatment medicine and not preventative medicine. Right.
Yes.
So, and for me, like one of my passions that I would really like to do is like a dissertation for like PA school. My idea would be like I would like to bridge the gap of insurance companies being able to work with personal trainers. Because they do a little bit, but not very often. What you would have to make a more standardization of the education for trainers, because that's not regulated very well. And I'm sure that's a big reason why insurance companies don't always want to do that. But the thing is, when you get somebody who's like from a doctor and they're like, hey, yeah, you have 4 months to fix your insulin or you're going to be diabetic, like, and they have no money and they can't pay a trainer, like, reasonably, that's preventative medicine. So like, and being able, and like technically for insurance purposes, you, in the long run, it cost your insurance less if your preventative health was better, right? They wouldn't have to pay for you to go to the doctor as often.
Well, and ultimately we might actually be able to like if it went far enough, majoratively, like we could lower people's insurance rates because less would be happening. We'd be going to the doctors less.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's a big problem. We spent in 2012, we spent $3 trillion only on diabetes and cardiovascular disease alone. 3 trillion. And they estimate that 75% of that can be preventable because we consider 25% of that can have some attributions to hereditary issues. You know, we can say, okay, about 25% of that we could say maybe be some hereditary issues, but 75% of $3 trillion.
That's so much.
That's like $2.2 trillion, like that is being wasted on two issues. And both of those things can, like, 99% of the time be fixed with nutrition and physical health, like in working out, basically. You know, because cardiovascular and diabetes, most of that comes from poor nutrition and poor working out. And the problem is that the demographic who needs that education to pass on, you know, generationally, they can't afford it. You know, if somebody's that, and not to mention that'd be the first thing that somebody would drop anyways, is like, if you're paying $400 a month for a trainer and you're like, oh man, I need to save a lot of money, what's going to be the first thing to go? Well, that's probably actually one of the more important things for your longevity and for your health. I have worked with insurance companies who've paid for some training for clients before. And I think that's a fantastic idea. I think that education is really like where that missing piece is. And if the majority was going about doing this properly, we could literally, like, you know, because education compound, you educate one person and they educate 5 people and those 5 people educate 5 people. You know what I mean? Like the compound effect of that could be huge.
Oh yeah.
So for me, that's been my kind of goal since I started learning a lot about preventative health and how our healthcare works. That's been my, like, one of my little bucket list things to do, is to try to see how I can put my voice out there about that.
No, I think that's what you're chasing here. I think is going to be, I think it should be a movement. Like that should legitimately be a movement, I think. Because I know the way that I get irritated about, and I think I was just lucky. Like I just got into physical fitness early and I wasn't so distracted by the world that, you know, I never learned that stuff. Like even if it was maybe a little bit of vanity, you know, getting into it, like at least I stepped in and I kind of self-educated just through experience enough to know how important it is, you know, and to have the mental and physical benefits so that, you know, it's just habitual. It's just part of my lifestyle now, no matter how much I fluctuate, you know, whether I'm a competitor or not. So that would kind of take me to this idea of, like, there's people out there that legitimately have no connection to physical and nutritional health, right? And these are the things that I love talking to you about, because these are your things. Like these are legit your things, is physical and nutritional health. And I know one of the first things. Well, do you think that one should come before the other? If you were going to start out at, you know, I guess eventually it has to encompass both. But how do you think that you would motivate people to do something first? What do you think? It'd be more physical, like exercise, or do you think it'd be more nutritional based?
It depends on the person, but a lot of people do better off concentrating on the physical side first and then adding the nutrition piece, because almost everybody dreads the nutrition piece more. Yeah,
we're addicted to food.
Well, yeah, and you got to think about the fact that The workout part is like that 1 or 2 hours a day that you can mentally get yourself motivated or disciplined enough to do that. But the nutrition part is you like 12, 14 hours a day mentally being disciplined. That's harder, being consistent with that. You have a bad day, you had a fight or whatever. And a lot of people, don't realize that, eating food, releases endorphins. And so they fix those issues, those short-term issues with food or whatever. And so it's a lot harder for people to stick with that first, in my experience. So a lot of times I'll have some people, I have had clients who've done better starting with nutrition and then going to the workout part. But for the majority, I'd say probably about 70%, maybe even 80%. Most people, once they start getting regular in the gym, then we add the next habit, the harder habit technically. But the reason why I think it works better is because once they start getting addicted to the gym, or they're starting to get those endorphins from somewhere else, first of all, so we don't have to rely on food as much. And they start to really want to see results. And a lot of them will start to realize, oh man, I'm not going to see the results until the food comes. So once they get in that habit of working out, they're like, oh man, this is really great, but I'm not seeing the results I want because of the food. And so that's usually when they make the decision to tack on the nutrition part and actually follow that. In fact, sometimes I have clients that come to me. In fact, I have a rugby client right now. It's kind of funny. I predicted this, but, he didn't want us to focus on food in the beginning. I said, that's fine. Whatever, we can focus on your performance. And that's what I've been doing with his training. Eventually he was like getting stronger and better, but he's kind of plateauing a little bit. And I kept telling him, I'm a broken record. I'm like, dude, if your food was better, you'd make more progress. You'd feel better during your workouts, like blah, blah, blah. He finally starts doing that. And what do you know? We got some physical progress going on. We're hitting PRs now because we're eating properly and fueling properly. And it took him a few months to make that decision, but that happens all the time.
So, yeah, I mean, because I know that there's been stages where, and I've, for the longest time, had an excuse as a powerlifter to eat a lot of things, because most of the time when I, when I'm heavier, like it's easier to handle the intense workouts. But to go against that, I know that I've been, even when I've been really driven and I want to work out really hard, I can go in the gym and bust my ass, but my peaking and my energy levels and the ability for me to feel like I'm at my best doesn't come until my food levels out, until I get things straight when it comes to like my hydration and my sleep and my food, especially my food. And I noticed it within like a couple weeks of eating clean. It's fucking crazy. It's crazy. So what is it? What are the big things in food that make the diet part so hard? What is it about fucking food? I mean, I know that we get these dopamine dumps, right?
I also think it's partly cultural. I honestly think it's a little bit cultural too, because we base a lot of things around food. You go to the movie theaters, what do? You buy snacks, when you have a get together, what's expected? Food. Is the food ever healthy? Is it like macro friendly food? No. You know what I mean? So in some ways, I think it's a little bit of a social cultural thing that, we base a lot of things around food and we don't choose things that are healthy basically. And it just kind of gets bypassed or whatever. Like people think of having a good time and they think of unhealthy food, not healthy foods. You know what I mean?
Oh, totally.
Like,
yeah.
In our brains, we don't, eating healthy seems like a chore and like a bad, like people have kind of a negative connotation to that. As soon as you talk about dieting, they're like, I don't want to eat chicken and rice all day. Like everybody's like, it's like they've got this frame of mind that's been given to them. But so I think it's kind of a social cultural thing. But like I said, I think it also just comes down to the fact that you have to be disciplined throughout an entire day versus 1 or 2 hours a day. You know what I mean? Like those shifts in emotions, people a lot of times use, we, as a race, we use different things to cope, right? Whether it be alcohol or drugs or food or whatever. And I think that food is obviously very easily accessible. And so I think a lot of people just kind of abuse it as far as being as a coping mechanism, really. Yeah. I mean, I'm guilty of that too, for sure. Like I recognize that within myself. And so I think that's probably part of the disconnect is just that we live in a society where we're hustle and bustle all the time. Our self-awareness, I think, has gone down because we spend so much time reading other people's opinions, looking at other people's opinions. We don't spend a lot of time by ourselves. And sometimes people's lack of self-awareness can take them to not understanding the underlying problem. And so we cope with something else. It's easier, right?
No, I know what you're getting at, because it's just been recently that I've been able to slow down enough and say, hey, is this a stress response? Like, am I going to go pick up this food because like, I feel like I need to be like, this is part of, a good health habit, or is this a stress response? And, obviously I ask myself that because of the type of food that I think I'm after, but it also depends on my sleep, like how well I sleep is connected to how habitual and disciplined I am about my food in the next day. It's super weird. I mean, I think once you think about it, it's probably fairly obvious, but it's also dependent on like the way that I work. So if I'm getting up early and I'm going straight to do like my regular day job stuff, I am way more susceptible to like getting like a gas station burrito and an energy drink, like the worst fucking thing. But if I'm going into something that I wake up and I've got plans for what I'm going to do based around my passion and my projects and my other streams of income, then I already know that I'm going to my kitchen to eat the stuff, the whole food stuff, and start off drinking water during the day. Like, it's crazy. And, that also goes into habits, but we probably won't be able to talk about that today. But but you did say something about being macro friendly. And to everybody that doesn't really understand what that means, like, what does it mean to be macro friendly? And I know it's going to get more complicated because it's going to depend on like what you're doing physically, right?
Right. So obviously macros is a breakdown. You got macronutrients and micronutrients. Macronutrients are going to be your protein, carbs, and fat. Those are going to be basically what your body uses primarily for different bodily functions and energy for the gym or daily life in general. And having a balance of that is important because your body has, I can't even remember, but it's like over 200 chemical reactions that happen in your body a day. And if you don't have the necessary ingredients for those to happen, they don't happen, and your body will make it happen some other way. So that's why it's important for the macronutrients to be balanced along with the calories. I tell people, I was just having this discussion with a client the other day, though, actually, but that it goes calories because obviously, as far as importance level, calories.
Know how much calories you take in?
Yeah. So you want to do calories in, calories out first. Then number 2 is macros, because we want that balance, because we want those calories to work for us in the best way possible. And then you got your food choices, because food choices do matter to a certain degree. I mean, let's put it this way. You can utilize food choices to increase your performance and increase your healing and different things like that. But that would probably be the order of importance that I would put them in.
Okay. No, that totally makes sense, because the more that I've listened, the more that I've heard a lot of people say the basic of it is the calories in, calories out, so that you're not overeating, so you're not undereating, and you're at least at this maintenance level to where your body can handle like your daily expenditure, I guess.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. And then once you actually go into the macros, I think this is crazy important, because it's going to depend on, because you can't just have protein shakes all day to hit your protein levels, right?
Right.
and you can't decide that you're just going to add oil to everything, to all of your food, to hit your fat levels, right? And most of the time people are probably going to blow that out of the water anyways. I think I mostly ever just destroy my fats, like when it comes to macro levels. But is there like a general sense of what the percentages should be? Like, what should we be meeting as far as our macro levels for each person?
Um, so obviously it's going to depend a little bit on what your goals are, but if you want to say just like, if I were to just slap a general rule, a lot of times like a 40-40-20 or like a 40-30-30 will work pretty well. So like, I'm a coach who tends to do a little bit of a higher carb. So, my carbs are almost, unless you're like in a serious deficit, your carbs are going to be at least 40%. You know, your fats are going to be 20-30%. And then your protein's going to be 30-40%.
And this is like percentage of your calories, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
But like, for example, for like power lifters, I change, that's a little bit different. Like power lifters, competitors, things like that are doing things for strength. I'm usually doing like more of a 50-60% carbs and then load the rest. I usually have at least a baseline of a 30% fat because it helps keep there's a lot of things it does, but partly helps keep joints lubricated and stuff like that, and hormone levels balanced. But like I said, probably like that 20-30% fat range. Then you've got like about 40% carbs. Sometimes you reduce that to 30, depending on if they're dieting hard or whatever. And then you're going to want to get, a lot of times I said 30-40% protein and then like 40%, sometimes plus for carbs. Like I said, I'm typically a higher carb. That's how I diet people, is a little bit higher carbs, mostly because in my experience, some people do better with higher carbs and some people do better with higher fats. Most people respond better to higher carbs than they do higher fats. Unless you're doing some extreme diet like the keto or whatever, where you're relying on fats as energy. Most people respond better to some of like that higher carb, just because that's where your body gets most of its energy, readily available glycogen, things like that.
And so if we were to theoretically use me as a powerlifter, there's, and refresh this for me, there's like a certain amount that they say you should utilize as your protein, right? Like your protein intake, and protein is going to do whatever for the body compared to the carbs and the fats. And right. I know that carbs are like the fast acting, so it's quicker energy levels, or better for energy for the gym or whatever. So as a power lifter, what would things be like for me? Like I'm 5'3", I weigh roughly 150 pounds, and I work out, say, 5 times a week, like 5 days a week.
So I typically will run protein up close to about a pound per body fat, or a pound of weight. You don't really have to do, you can, there's a couple ways to do that. You can do just lean mass. I typically will stick around body weight, sometimes a little bit less actually, just so I can push carbs.
Oh, okay.
So like, for example, you could, like when I say a little bit less, I mean like 140 to 145 grams of protein, like a little bit less than what you are, like doesn't have to be crazy. And then you're looking at like, I like to do about 10 to 12 carbs per pound of body weight too. Okay. So, I'm not very good at math, so I don't know what that is off the top of my head without a calculator, but like, for example, I have a client right now who is a powerlifter who is about 172 pounds, and a lower end carb diet for him would be a little over 400 carbs, and a higher end carb diet for him would probably be about 550 for carbs. And right now I'm sitting somewhere kind of on the lower end with him, but and then as far as your fats, usually about at that point your fats usually are sitting around 70 or 80 about around that time. Maybe a little bit less, just like if it were for you, for example, since you're a little bit smaller, your carb range would be a little bit less, not by much, probably like higher 300s to high 400s, is where we'd put you for carbs. And then your fats would probably sit, like I said, probably around between 60 and 80, but 60 would be very low end, so probably around 80. I always, whenever I take on a client, I'm always kind of upregulating their metabolism. So I really don't really get people who come to me already eating enough. So usually it's me bringing your food up to that point. Because most people come to me with just wacky macros and calories.
Well, yeah, and who knows where what they come to you with, like stuff that they found off the internet, maybe. I
Mm-hmm.
guess like there's so much crazy stuff on there. I can't remember the last time I paid attention to anything health related, off of the
Yeah.
internet. I mostly go off what I know and what the smart people around me know, the coaches,
Right.
the health professionals that I know personally. Um, but this would also depend on like what you were talking about with the whatever your goals are, because then
Mm-hmm.
if you were say a bodybuilder and you need to lean out, obviously you start at the top. Like are you gonna, like, is it for cutting? You're gonna have different stages of bodybuilding. You're gonna have
Mm-hmm.
like commonly it's like what a bulk phase and a leaning phase or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
which can change over time depending on when your competition's on or whatever. But
Right.
so we're not getting too jumbled up here. So we start with calories in, calories out is the best way to get an idea of where we should be health wise. And then we jump down to macros. And then
Mm-hmm.
you said the next thing is like our micronutrients, right? So what does that include? Where do we get the best micronutrients? How do we know we're at good levels? I know that I've taken a bunch of vitamins. I don't know if I've always taken the right the right vitamins, but where do you start off with people on the micronutrients? What do you know, and what do you
So that would
recommend
be
as
where
well?
so I guess kind of food sources slash micronutrients. So I'm a very much whole foods person, and that's
Mm-hmm.
partly because that's what my bodybuilding coach instilled in me. In fact, I'm not a person who drinks protein shakes very often. I pretty much try and get all of my stuff with whole foods, partly
Mm-hmm.
because I mean I like to eat, so like physically eating is more enjoyable for me than drinking a shake. Like that's more of a, like, I get more satiation from that.
Mm-hmm.
But also that gives me an opportunity to get better micronutrients from my food. So like not just getting pure protein because I just need protein. I also want to have the vitamins and minerals that are supporting the protein transport or other nutrient transport in my body,
Mm-hmm.
because that's basically what micronutrients do, is they help transport some of those macronutrients and other bodily processes. They're like part of the chemical reaction, basically.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what I would consider them as. And in my opinion, if you are um, eating maintenance calories or above, you shouldn't have to do a lot of supplementing. You should just probably eat whole foods.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing a little bit about some of the benefits of different foods can help too. Whereas, like, as far as talking about like simple and complex carbs. So really, the only thing that means is that they're either a polysaccharide, which obviously poly means more than one, or a monosaccharide. A polysaccharide means that it has more than one bond that needs to be broken molecule wise in order
Okay.
for it to be used. A monosaccharide has one bond that needs to be broken, takes a lot less energy for your body to do, a lot faster before it can be used, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when people are saying, hey, yeah, you should eat a simple carb before you work out, that's because your body only has to break one bond before it can release the energy that's the kilojoules that are in that calorie, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and which takes less energy for the body, less time, more readily available. Whereas, like, for example, a complex carb, it can have 2 bonds, 3 bonds, I think 4 bonds. Some are, anyways, you got multiple bonds, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and those, for somebody who's like experienced or whatever, I tend to use those towards the end of the day so like I load up on like more simple carbs in the beginning of the day to energize me throughout the day. So I'm kind of stay level. And then at the end of the day, I'm still needing to get food in. Number one, I start getting cravings, so I don't really want to be hungry in the evening because that's, when I'm going to start making bad decisions. And two, I don't need as readily available energy when I'm sitting at home, like maybe
Mm-hmm.
after dinner or whatever. And so what I'll do is I'll do something that takes longer to break down. So A, I'm not hungry, and B, my body is just working on breaking down those molecules, and you're still getting the macronutrients, but you don't need that readily available energy.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so the other thing that I think people need to understand is that they probably need to pay attention to the differences in food choices too, based on your simple carbs and your complex carbs.
So
right?
In a general rule, like anything that's going to be like a white bread, a white rice, something that's starchy, a white potato, those are all going to be a monosaccharide. So a simple carb. And then a lot of times we can think of a polysaccharide being something that's going to be a darker color, actually. So you're going to find that in like brown rice, even like darker leafy vegetables, things like that. Sweet potatoes. So again, a little bit of a darker color. I know it's kind of interesting how the color can kind of correlate, but for simplicity reasons, I kind of say that. Or, like a wheat bread, things like that. So as far as like knowing what they are, a lot of people don't really know the difference.
Yeah. That's what I mean too.
Yeah. So
well, and where does because most people will know that most of our fruit is pretty carb heavy too. So where does that sit on the line between the two?
Simple.
So those are still more
sugars.
Carbs.
Yeah, they're pretty much sugars. So they're very simplistic carbs. And I mean, they're healthier sugars, obviously. And you're also getting micronutrients from vegetables and fruits. So that's a reason to incorporate it. It was interesting. We had a discussion in one of my nutrition classes one time about whether or not, because a lot of people recently these days have talked about, you should cut fruit out of your diet, whether or not that is good or bad, because a lot of fruits have a lot of vitamins and minerals in them. Well, technically, you don't need fruit. You can get a lot of your micronutrients are actually more saturated in vegetables. So like when people are like, oh yeah, you get a ton of potassium from bananas, it's actually not that much. Sweet potatoes have like 4 to 6 times more potassium than a banana does. You know what I mean?
Jesus.
Yeah. So like people will talk about, I'm trying to think something else off the top of my head. Vitamin C, like coming from oranges, not very much, versus like bell peppers.
Really?
Well, those are A and K maybe. But no, I do know that when it came down to us doing the research, all of those micronutrients can be found in vegetables, but in an even higher concentration. Now, does that mean fruit's bad by any means? No. Don't demonize fruit, please. But what I say for people is like, if you like that, if you want to take that sugar in, do it at a time where it's going to benefit you, in the beginning of the day, right before a workout, post workout, whatever, because your body's going to use those right away.
Well, and I think that you're so good at this nutrition stuff. I want to make sure that we kind of have we don't forget that people can learn the basic, of like, knowing that a complex carb is probably going to be more whole food, but a lot of people get this idea that simple carb, means that they can eat more processed stuff, right? Because that's going to be more simple carb. But there's going to be a difference between the way you eat, the way a simple carb, what it's going to do for you as far as fruit compared to like what a box of Pop-Tarts is going to do for you, right?
Right. Correct. Yep.
And so I don't want to get so complex because I can't fucking understand, but there's obviously going to be a difference. Like if you were to go with like the method you were talking about and eating more simple carbs throughout the day, it's obviously going to be better for you to eat fruits, and it probably maybe has something to do with the micronutrients too than it is to be eating pixie sticks and Pop-Tarts and whatever other processed shit. Because if I've done that, like when I've done that stuff, when I'm off my diet or I don't give a fuck or I'm stressed or whatever, I know that I really don't feel great, no matter how, like if I hit the amount of carbs that I needed to or not. Like I just don't feel like, I feel groggy compared to eat if I, throughout the morning and the afternoon, I ate a couple apples and bananas and stuff like that. Like I like fruit.
Right.
But there's obviously a difference there.
Yeah. So I'd say in a simple way, at the end of the day, are those functioning similarly or almost identical as far as what they do? Yes. But the way that your body processes them, different as far as like you need more digestive enzymes, different digestive enzymes to break down a Pop-Tart than you are going to need a banana. And if you think about it in a way of chemical reactions, when your body's producing digestive enzymes, it tends to also produce gas at the same time as part of that chemical reaction. And that's where that bloating comes in and that stomach discomfort and things like that.
Okay.
The other thing about like man-made sugars and things like that is I'm not an expert on this by any means, but I do believe it does communicate chemically differently to your brain when you're eating like a processed man-made sugar than when you're eating natural sugar. I don't know the exact things on that, but I do know that that is a thing that is studied. So
well, and also what I kind of like to ask you is, would that also mean that there's more potential for processed food, like those simple carbs, to eventually become like extra fat comparatively to other like more whole food carbs?
I don't know that.
This is where I make an assumption because I'm like, oh, like processed food is bad, you know?
Yeah. So I do know that sometimes I would say more or less that the processed food would be more likely for you to like hold water and maybe not necessarily real weight. It may be more like water weight. Because at the end of the day, technically a sugar is a sugar and it will be made into glycogen. Like it will. But I do know there's some things that will go on with the body, like I said, when having to create more digestive enzymes, different things like that, that will make the body like hold more water in response to that, basically. So I guess I would say on a surface level, probably not necessarily make you gain weight, but it won't make you look as good. And this is what I tell my clients when I say food choices comes last, is I tell them at the end of the day, calories in, calories out, but you will look better if you eat whole foods and you will feel better if you eat whole foods. Can you make the same progress? Arguably, probably pretty darn close. Except for when you get pretty close to like, being super lean, but pretty darn close, but you will look a little bit different just based on your body having to break down whatever you're forcing it to break down.
Well, and I think that would definitely would make some sense, because if calories in, calories out is the first thing, Jordan Site is a guy that I really like to follow, and he's always argued that, like, he gets ridiculously mad about this sometimes, and he went on like a McDonald's diet to kind of disprove his point. So he didn't actually gain weight, but he did say something about which would make sense to me, is like, even if those simple carbs are not going to fat, by my assumption, which sounds wrong, is that then it would come down to how well your body processes and how good it feels, and like how many micronutrients that you're really getting comparatively. And maybe that's the biggest lesson.
Yeah. So, I mean, it could be a possibility that you are getting less micronutrients, so you're not getting that facilitation for some of the things that need to be going on, which requires the body to gain water weight or whatever. There's another point I was going to say about that. Hold on. I can't remember, but basically, at the end of the day, he's right as far as calories in, calories out. But what I was going to say is also just how it affects your hormones too. So I don't know a lot about this, ton about the studies about, processed food and hormones, but I know that it can affect them. So again, you are affecting how your body is handling things, processing. Hormones are huge when it comes to losing weight. Gut flora is huge when it comes to losing weight. And so in my opinion, when you're putting those processed foods in, you're risking, your upsetting your organs because they're having to process things differently. You are risking upsetting your hormones because of processes. And then, I just think that, and then just not having that micronutrient delivery as well. I mean, for me, it just makes sense to, if you're really looking for change, kind of like I've talked about before, your body is a system. It's like a car, it needs exactly what it needs. And if you don't give it that, eventually it's going to break down. So it just makes sense to fuel it in the most efficient way possible.
Yeah. And that's honestly, to me, that's the most basic idea that I can attach to, because it makes the most sense, is that if we do everything like we were meant to do evolutionarily, we're going to be that much closer to the way that we should work. And, I demonize a lot of stuff. And I do it for my own sake to kind of scare me into doing almost scare me into doing the right things, but it's like, if I can stay away from the foods that I kind of label as bad, then the better my body's going to feel, and the more attention or attentive I'm going to be towards what's important as far as my physical and nutritional health. And the thing that that bothers me about it, I guess, is that it's also got all these side effects, and we can talk about this a little bit if you know anything about it, but I do know that I'm more susceptible to like anxiety, and it seems like inflammation, and it seems like my body doesn't sleep as well when I have those types of things in my system. And it comes down to, like you were talking about, with self-awareness, because I think most of the time people just wake up and like, man, I feel shitty today, or I feel shitty tonight, or I didn't sleep well, but nobody actually asks themselves why it was like that. Like, are they digging back and be like, okay, well, what did I eat yesterday? Well, okay, did I drink enough water or anything like that? And trying to pay attention to, am I getting the basic things that really, make me better at what I'm doing?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think your philosophy is correct. I mean, evolutionary, that's kind of why I say, part of the issue is just cultural, is because we really don't need that much to function, and we don't really need, this, that, and the other. We used to only eat for survival, and now we eat socially, like cultural, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's no longer a fuel. It's more of like a commodity. I don't really know. You know what I mean? It's so people just use food differently now. And I think you're right. People don't always know how it's affecting them. Cause I can definitely, as somebody, and I think part of it is because sometimes people may have never had good habits, so they don't know what it feels like. Cause it's really interesting for a client to me be like, hey, let's eat this way. Like, literally just trust me for like 2 weeks. I promise you will feel better. Like, there's just no question, and then they do, and they're amazed. But sometimes to me, when I see that amazement, I'm like, you've lived 35 years and you've never felt this way before. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so how could you know that it would be better if you only ever experienced it one way?
Well, yeah. So I think part of it has just to do with sometimes with people can't have that self-awareness because they don't know what it's like when it's any different. It's not until you change their perspective and they actually feel the results that they actually believe you. Because I cannot tell you how many times I sit in front of somebody and tell them all this shit, and they look at me and they're like, okay, and they don't really believe me, and then they experience it and they will come to me and be like, oh my God. And they have like this enlightenment. And it's like, and that's why, to me, it's so frustrating that people aren't educated, because it's like, dang, if people just knew what they were doing, maybe we could have a little bit more self-awareness of how food affects us, because everybody would be doing it. It'd be like a common thing. That's kind of, I don't know how much I want to get into this, but that's kind of why I don't like the if it fits your macros fin thing only, because there's a ton of bodybuilders and stuff like that like spend a lot of time eating crazy concoctions, or like just foods that have like added protein to them and like protein bars and shakes, and they rely on that like every day. And you know, it just, your body processes that and receives that information differently than it does a whole food. And I don't know, I guess I just wish that it was more easily accessible to everybody, and everybody had that experience, because I think it would change some habits.
Do you think that, because I think I kind of know what you're talking about, because people get so obsessed with the numbers that they stop paying attention to the what it is that they're taking in. Is that what you kind of mean?
Well, yeah, like they'll like literally like add protein powder to everything. They're like, okay, well, I added protein powder into my yogurt. I ordered protein powder in this. I baked this with protein powder. I'm like, cool. You are fitting the macros and you're figuring out how to eat around your macros, I guess, but you're not really fueling your body to its fullest extent, or you're not really paying attention to the function of those macronutrients, because that matters. It's kind of like when people diet really hard, like low fats. I think that my assumption is that they forget that fats really help regulate your hormones.
Yeah.
Because the clients that come to me with broken hormones have often been starved of fats for a while, or
really
vice versa. Yeah, I've had definitely, like, especially like clients who've done like strict dieting with other coaches.
They just cut out fats.
Well, they'll just be too low, especially for females. Females have to have like a certain amount of fats to function, like period, end of story. And you know, you lose your cycle, like all these different things happen once you drop those too low, right? And now your hormones are shifting. Males, it's a little easier to diet them a little lower fat than females, but it definitely affects your hormone production.
Do you think that has something to do with like a psychological, the psychological idea that fats will make you fat? Like people try to cut fat out because they're afraid of gaining weight?
I think not enough people understand the function of the macronutrients. I just don't. They don't understand what it does at a chemical level. It was honestly one of the best things that ever happened to me was my biology classes, where I started to understand, you know, biology and chemistry, actually just kind of correlating them together. I actually took both those classes at the same time. And it was really cool because I was learning about like bonds and molecules, and then in chemistry, and then in biology, I was learning about like how these molecules like are processed into the body and things like that, and all of the things that need to happen for that to happen. And then I started correlating those with food, you know, and how that works. And I just think that sometimes we forget that at the end of the day, our body is literally a bunch of chemical reactions, and you know, you need to put the right amount of each thing in, kind of like a recipe. You cook a recipe, you put too much butter in it, it's not gonna turn out so good. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Like too much fats, too little fats, whatever. And so I think that the main disconnect there is just coaches not understanding at a chemical level what's happening in the body.
Well, and I guess that this is definitely more for me than maybe anybody else, which I tend to do every once in a while. But so
it's your podcast.
True. But I do want to get information out there that people can. I think what I'm trying to do is find basic clarity that people can attach to, right? So this last thing on macros would be, this last curiosity would be, what do you think is the benefit of proteins, carbs, and fats, just for the sake of what it does for us? You know what I mean? So what's the benefit of the protein? What's the benefit of the carb? Because you said carbs are kind of like energy one. And then, you know, what's the benefit of the fats, which you kind of said about like lubricating joints and stuff. So if people need to know the importance of those three things, like why are we putting those three things, paying attention to those three things? What are they doing for the body?
Um, you are testing my memorization skills, kind of. So fats, like I said, having fat on your body is important for, like I said, the lubrication of the joints. Like being too lean is like a powerlifter, strongman competitor. That very bad for your joints. Very bad for your joints. Like they're dry. Being super lean is like a competitor. Bad. Yeah. You know, I can't imagine how uncomfortable that would be. But I would say fat's main thing is regulating hormones, but also facilitating some micronutrient delivery. As far as protein goes, it is directly affects the rebuilding process of the muscles, obviously. And I think that's mainly common knowledge, but it does. And then it will also, you know, you do lose, you know, some of it for energy as well. All of them do have a role in facilitating processes. And then as far as carbs go, those directly turn into glycogen, which glycogen is stored in your muscles, and that is what your body will readily take for energy. And it's like a direct conversion versus like a fat and a protein. It's not really a direct conversion from a protein to glycogen.
It takes more for a protein and a more fat
processes to get there. Yeah. So a carb is like a direct process and versus like a multiple process to get there. And that's why obviously we talk about it as being your, you know, your energizer or whatever. And then just understanding that, you know, this is fairly common knowledge, but a protein and a carb are going to be 4 calories per gram.
Okay.
And then you got fats, which is 9 calories per gram.
And then that's how you can kind of like find out what your calorie count should be or is going to be for the day based on that.
Right. So like, so even for example, when somebody's saying, hey, 150 grams of protein and 60 grams of fat, and people are like, oh my gosh, that's half the amount of fat than protein. But if you do the math, because it's 9 calories per gram, you're actually getting about the same amount of calories from fats as you are protein. And I think people forget that they have different values. They're not, they don't have the same value calorie wise.
So would there also be some sort of detriment or benefit in the style of diet you have then? Because do you try to get, that's kind of a loaded question, but do you have differences in diets? Like, do people have different diets for the training that you do with them, like the coaching that you do with them? Is that going to make a difference?
Yes. Well, most of the time. So I try to diet them coinciding to their training, meaning like if we are going into like a strength phase, you know, they are going to have a little bit of higher fats. Their carbs are also going to be higher during that phase because they're going to need those glycogen stores. They're going to need that readily available energy. And it's really important when you're spiking your cortisol levels, which happens obviously when you break down those muscle fibers, that your hormones are shifting properly. And so their fats are a little bit higher. Plus they also need that a little bit extra padded energy, which I give from fats because it's more calories per gram. Versus somebody who, if they were in a phase where I'm trying to like hit them with endurance, I probably would actually, well, that's not a very good example. But I guess a lot of times when I'm bringing a client into a lower carb phase, it's because we've decided that we're going towards more of a deficient. So like their training is going to be a little bit lighter, a little bit more reps, you know, as far as like, you know, 15 or 20, whatever. And I bring those down. And even though you're still going to blow through your glycogen stores, you don't really need as much readily available like ATP energy, which is just that like up to 30 seconds of energy that your body can burst out, which you do need for more for heavy lifting than you do for endurance. Because after a certain amount of time, your body switches processes on how it continues to gain its energy. So in an endurance phase, I don't force them to load up on carbs quite as much, I guess. I would say that honestly, for the general population, it's more or less, again, I tend to base their stuff more around what we're doing acute training wise / what their lifestyle is. Like, for example, here's kind of an example. I get clients all the time that bust through their fats first.
Oh,
like,
that
is
totally
so common. Yeah, that is so common. And so I will try in most cases with those types of clients to diet them at a little bit of a higher fat level, just because I know that asking them to completely change their habits may or may not happen. For the average person, it just doesn't.
Like if they have a tendency to eat food that's higher fat.
Well, yeah, they did. Like if they have that tendency already, they are probably going to struggle. If they're like eating an average of 90 fats a day, and I'm like, okay, now you only eat 50, they're probably going to struggle, and they're going to be like, I'm busting these every day. Mm-hmm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be like, okay, this person, let's try to adjust them a little bit slower, maybe hit their fats at like 70, but then adjust their carbs and fat around that. You know what I'm saying? A little bit, so that like those percentages would be a little bit different, just because I'm like, okay, I don't like to ask people to completely change their habits like a 360, because the reason why I rarely do that is because most of the time it'll happen for a couple of weeks and then it won't, or B, they won't do it. They just won't do it, so I like to take a little bit of a slower approach with that. But when it comes to athletes, yes, their macros are going to coincide with their training. For example, with Alex, whenever we go into a comp, I start to lower his fats. He's a strongman competitor
that's of epic proportions, if you don't know.
Yes, a pro strongman competitor. So what I will do is I start to bring down his fats, and then I start to increase his carbs. Mm-hmm. Last time when we went into the Arnold's, his carbs were 1,400 a day.
Jesus Christ.
Usually he sits closer to like 800 or 900.
Well, and he's a beast of human too. He's like, is he 300 pounds almost? Or
nope. No, that's our goal.
Oh, okay.
So that's partly why his fats are higher during off season too, is because we're trying to put weight on him. Because he's technically small for his sport. So I think right now he's sitting around 280, maybe 282. But he's
not a fat athlete. Like he's actually fairly lean for his sport.
Yeah, about 10%. He's really lean for his sport.
Yeah.
10% body fat. But that's because I've been doing Alex's food for a long time. And when I first started with him, first of all, he did not want to. He was like anti, but I don't really need to pay attention to my food. I'm a strongman competitor,
Yeah.
I let him get away with eating like a lot of like cheeseburgers and stuff like that. I don't allow that anymore, because I'm like, listen, Alex, if you're my long-term client, I need your blood work to look pretty. I need your organs to be happy. Therefore, I'm not going to allow you to eat that way. So he eats a lot cleaner than he used to. So now he's like pretty lean, not to mention the more you reverse in and out. So he reverses in and out of diets. Usually we reverse him in and out, probably, I would say an average of 2 to 3 times a year. He gets better every time. And every single time he gets a little bit leaner, and his metabolism gets a little bit better. And trust me, it is very hard on me because I'm sure. I don't know what I'm going to do with you. I've created a monster. But because every year we kind of have to push those calories a little higher. But anyways, with him, I pull those fats down because we've, kind of hit our weight that we want. But now I want more readily available energy. That guy, strongman competitions can be 3 hours long, and you're waiting in between events, and you need to stay energetic throughout the whole thing. So I will start to bring down his fats closer to comp and start increasing his carbs. And that's just kind of the way that we do it. So I do align it with like athletes for sure.
So can you also explain reverse dieting a little bit so people understand what that's doing for an athlete like Alex and like what the benefit is? Because it happens with a lot of athletes, right? Like bodybuilders and powerlifters, and depending on what you're doing.
Yep. Yeah. So it's steadily increasing calories over time, because your body is basically a machine that adapts, right? So you give it 1,600 calories, it'll adapt to that 1,600 calories. Then you give it 1,800 calories, it'll adapt. Then and your metabolism will adapt with it. It's also to help kind of stabilize insulin as well. So like a lot of people, when they don't eat for a very long time, you get a huge crash in your insulin levels, and then you eat a whole bunch, right? You binge because that's what you want to do. Now your insulin has spiked. So you end up like this, you're going up and down constantly, and that creates energy crashes. It creates a lot of like grogginess, tiredness. It takes away from your body being able to store glycogen because it doesn't know when its next meal is going to be. Your body really will adapt to whatever you do to it, right? So you steadily adapt to higher calories over time. You do it nice and slow so you can kind of body recomp through, which means that a lot of people will actually lose body fat during that time, because
when they reverse diet.
You are giving your body what it needs. So what does it do? It treats you nicely back by dropping some of the survival tools, which is its fat that has on it, right?
Like holding on to weight.
Yep. Because when you don't eat enough, your body is going to hold on to that fat, because it's kind of like a camel, it collects, a camel's humps collects water, during the day or whenever it gets it, and it stores it for use. Okay. Your body, if you're eating 600 calories a day or whatever, say you're eating like way under, and your body doesn't, and you have a really inconsistent eating schedule, your body may or may not know when it's going to get its next meal. So what's it going to do? It's going to store it, because we are survival tools. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, yeah.
So then that would mean, because this is something else I was curious about, because that would mean that scheduling the way that you eat is going to be important too, right? But that could also, and you can tell me what you think about this, but there's people that eat, 5 or 6 times a day. It usually seems like more of a bodybuilder thing. I could be wrong, but eat like 5 or 6 times a day. And then there's some people that eat will fast to a certain part of the day, like 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and spend like 8 hours being able to eat, and then, not eating until 2 or 3 the next day. So is there a difference between those, or is it just about the consistency of doing that exact same thing every day? Is it going to depend on like your training, or do you not, I don't know, do you not condone certain things when it comes to that?
I will say that I'm not an expert on intermittent fasting. I don't particularly like it, because in my opinion, for most people, it's unnecessary and doesn't always support their goals. And people are just not perfect at it, which some of those types of diets you really need to be perfect at. So meaning like your fasting windows are exact, and your caloric intake every time during those fasting windows are exact.
Gotcha.
And in my personal opinion, I don't like to complicate things for people, because quite frankly, the average person ain't gonna do it. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and maybe it just has to do with what their lifestyle is like.
Correct. So occasionally, I will say, like, some people who like have jobs where like they're a nurse, like a NICU or something like that, where eating during the day just isn't really reasonable. Sometimes lifestyle wise, I have had lifestyle clients where I have allowed fasting windows, because it just fits their lifestyle a lot better.
But you have to be dialed in.
Yes. When I put people on more specific diets like that, I always try to set the expectation of, I need you to be more perfect than you would if I just gave you something regular, basically. And if you're committed to that, great. If you're not committed to that, it's useless. You know what I mean? If you're fasting and you do fasting windows and you follow it some days and you don't follow it other days, it's not going to work. It's at all. It's kind of like people who are always jumping off and on keto. Keto does work, and it can help regulate your insulin levels. and it can help you drop weight really fast. But it's not good for a typical athlete because you're not going to go to those glycogen stores.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to hold as much water. So sometimes people have a little bit harder time with hydration. And then the last and most obvious thing is that sticking to a keto diet means that you're doing that basically 100% of the time, unless if you're doing like a keto cheat meal diet. But even then, like, you need to be more on point than the average person if you're going to take that on.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like the more thoroughly you eat throughout the day, the more kind of lax you can be, maybe. Like, your time doesn't have to be as on point, but maybe that depends on whether you're an athlete or not too. If you're just a regular, like, just an average gym goer, like, go 5-6 times a week just to stay in shape, then maybe it's a little bit different. But obviously our most basic I guess knowledge or basic idea around food intake has always been like 3 times a day, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So is that a good method still? Or because I done a lot, I think my most beneficial was when I was eating like 5 or 6 times a day. But what's the difference like between those, and like is there something that's better off than the other? Or
it's the insulin.
Okay.
I think the main reason you should eat within those amount of times is because of if you can keep your insulin levels regulated throughout the day, because your body's going to takes, depending on what you're eating, but often between 1 and I think 4 hours to completely process certain foods. So it's like, that's why they say every 3, because your body's done. All right, it's time to spike the insulin a little bit. And so keeping that insulin level more regular through the day is a big one.
So that's probably the easiest way to do it then, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, for sure. And I know it's more of a bodybuilder thing, but it's really not. It has to do with more about, like I said, keeping that level throughout the day, the insulin levels, rather than just being like, oh yeah, it's going to speed up your metabolism. That's not really what it's about. You're hungry again because your body's processed that, you're ready for your next meal. You're not spiking up and down with that insulin.
Okay. That makes sense.
Which messes with your hunger hormone. And you know how you said you have more issues when you don't sleep? That's because when you don't sleep very well, your body produces more of your hunger hormone. I think leptin and ghrelin, I believe, when you are sleep deprived, right? So then it's sending signals to your brain that you're more hungry, even if you're not, just because it messed with your hormones, right? So that's why a lot of people, if you don't get enough sleep at night, that's why it's hard to control your food throughout the day.
Oh, okay. Okay, no, that makes sense.
So you're really trying to control the communication between your body and your brain, and keeping those insulin levels regular. I think that would be the most simplistic way to go about dieting the average individual. Not to mention, I would say that the average individual that has never really like consistently dieted, they don't need to just do something crazy. They just need to fix their relationship with food and eat whole foods. A lot of people think they need to make this crazy drastic change and I'll follow this, I'll follow that. Well, at the end of the day, really, it's about what your relationship with food is, because none of those diets are going to work if your relationship with food is bad. Let me tell you that. And you're continuing to use it as a comfort or whatever. And so that's kind of why I also like to be more basic, is because at a core level, it's more about, like I said, that relationship with food and just learning how to live a healthy lifestyle rather than following any specific diet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I always like to. I think there's a lot of factors that can add up. For example, for myself, like I was through my 20s, I was going to the gym like 6 days a week. I was working 8 or 10-hour days. I was eating 5 or 6 times a day, and like my body stayed really lean. I always seemed to have energy, but it probably also had to do with my age. But I drank a lot of water. Like there was just a lot of things that kind of lined up really well. But I think the probably the most beneficial part of that had to be the way that I took in my food. I think that was a huge part of it was how I was taking in my food. I was consistently almost every fucking day having 5 or 6 meals, and they were all regulated, and my body was at its best at that point.
Yeah.
When I was eating like that.
Yep. Your test levels are probably a little higher too, but which helps.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. But other than that, that's the main gist of it, is that you found something that works and you were consistent. Consistency matters a lot since your body adapts.
Mm-hmm. So talking about consistency, then let's jump into the training part. So 2 things that I'm curious to ask you about are like the plateauing when it comes to the physical part of it, and people kind of freaking out and not really knowing what to do. I know progressive overload is kind of a big thing too, but also recovery. And people, because we get so, well, my food's good, my sleep's good, like I'm training really hard, but nothing's happening either. And I know recovery is a part of that. And we undervalue recovery a lot too. But I don't know which one you want to start with, but I think plateauing because of lack of stimulus is something I want to talk about, and then also the recovery thing and how important that is.
So one thing that I notice a lot sometimes with people when it comes to their training is this is probably not as relatable for somebody like you, but a lot of people like to change their training up too fast because they get bored.
Mm-hmm.
So that quote unquote lack of stimulus partly has to do with the fact that they aren't really following a progressive overload because they're wanting to switch their exercises up all the time. You actually want your body to adapt, because that adaptation is where, during that adaptation period is where that muscle growth happens, right? Mm-hmm. In the beginning, it's really hard. Now you're adapting, the muscle growth is happening, and then you plateau and then you have to change the stimulus. Well, I get complaints from clients all the time. Like they want to change their training from week to week. They're like, I've been doing lateral raises like for months. I'm like, yeah, I've been doing lateral raises for 10 years. Like, you know what I mean? Like there are some staple movements, like squat, but and you're going to continue to do them but you're going to run through different phases as far as like reps, sets, what order that you do them in, small changes. You don't have to change the exercise by any means right away. You can just change your rep range. You can change your weight. You can do like drop sets. You can do different things like that. And I think a lot of those things are underutilized, not to mention people are just like really ADD with their training and they want to try the newest, greatest next thing. Oh, I saw this on Instagram to build your butt. Like I should do this exercise. It's like, okay, the latest and greatest exercise is kind of at the end of the day, working out is very much meat and potatoes, and you have kind of a lot of your main movements and some movements that require more recruitment than others, and there's reasons why you do certain exercises, and there's reasons why you do them in certain orders. There's reasons why you do them certain in a progressive sort of way. One of the easiest examples that I talk to clients about all the time is like when I have a client squat at first, I tend to do a goblet box squat first. So first of all, weights in front of the body because that's easier. And then I also put a box behind them because I'm trying to teach them body awareness, right? We're learning about depth and we're learning about how to balance our weight, because a lot of people have a really bad problem with balancing their weight within their feet. So whether or not they've got all of it in their toes and and so that's where a lot of people can struggle when you put a bar on them, right? So you put some weight in front of them, you teach them, hey, you can squat backwards and sit all the way down and not fall. There's literally people, you put them on the bar, they're terrified they're going to fall backwards. So they won't put any of their weight into their heels. And then next, we're going to take the box away. You still have the weight in front of you. Let's see if you still have the same body awareness with the same, type of weight in front of you. Can you still squat to depth? Can you still get up and down? Can you still balance that weight within your feet? Then we move into maybe placing the bar on their back, right? So that's kind of like a very easy and typical way like I would progress that. And the other benefit that I forgot from box squats is a lot of people's hips are really weak. So like, like that sticking point kind of at the bottom of the squat, or like when you start coming up right out of the hole.
Yep. You're only like a few inches above depth.
Yes. So box squats can really help with that, that hip drive, because I make people stop. So like you're sitting all the way down and you're recreating that momentum to stand back up. Right. So instead of having that momentum from coming down and coming back up, you're actually dead stopping, and you're having to recreate that momentum, which also creates some stability and some power within the hips. Got it. Right. So there's like a ton of reasons why you progress things and you do things in a certain way. And I just think that people don't utilize it that well, basically.
So the big part of it is people have to kind of get used to the monotony of it almost. Like you have you have to like get used to the boredom of like that same exact fucking thing all the time. Yeah. Because you can't, like if you're not continually stimulating those muscles, then they're not even going to be able to adapt to the point where you can progressively overload. I guess. Does that make sense? I guess. Yep. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. It's, and I've done this for long enough that I get less complaints because I always set these expectations up front, because I know these questions are coming basically at some point. So I'd rather just be like, hey, this is how it's going to go. And anyways, but yeah, I do think that, and I do think that honestly, in a lot of ways, food also keeps people from progressing, because even if you are doing your training monotonously and things like that, if your food's not supporting it, again, you're going to run into your physical wall if you're not fueling your body to its greatest potential. You can't expect it to function to its greatest potential when you're not fueling it for that reason.
Yeah, there's definitely been days where it doesn't feel like my blood is even running. like I don't have any mind muscle connection some days, and my body just feels kind of like almost sticky. Like it doesn't want to open up to resistance. If that makes sense? Yeah. Obviously a heavily caffeinated pre-workout may help with that. but there are just days where it doesn't feel like my blood is even warm. Like it doesn't, does that make sense? It doesn't feel like it's like I'm connecting to the weight at all, no matter how heavy it is or how many reps I do. Right. Which may also have to do, because one of my biggest issues for some reason all of a sudden is my water intake. How important is our water intake and the hydration part of this too?
I mean, your body is 70% water, so 70% less efficient if you don't give it water.
Come on, Zach, get your shit together.
It's very important, because it is involved in basically every process in your body. You have to have the H2O molecules to attach or break down other molecules in the body, right? So if that's not present, that's not going to happen.
When it comes to like our food?
Well, and making sure that you have adequate water intake. Not to mention, definitely studies have shown that not having adequate water intake for some reason communicates with our brain sometimes as hunger and like having different cravings for things that don't exist. Ooh. Simply because you're dehydrated. Oh. Okay. So that's another reason. It's just.
So, and I kind of had like this little like trifecta of things that made sense to me. So what about like I mentioned before, what about the recovery side of this? Because I know for myself too, like I've way ignored recovery. Like everything's been tight and I like couldn't grow anymore. And I was stiff all the time. And so there's obviously huge points of recovery, like definitely great benefits. So what does recovery look like? What are the types of things that we should be doing for recovery to make sure that our body can grow? Like, how does that fit? How does that piece fit in with nutritional health and physical health?
obviously at a scientific level, the reason why recovery is important is because it helps our body continually adapt. Like, for example, as far as like rolling and stretching and things like that, when you have an adhesion in the muscle, that muscle no longer is able to elongate and contract to its fullest extent, right? So now we're not able to work it properly. Now we're not able to break down the muscle fibers the way that it needs to during its eccentric and concentric and eccentric phases, which would be like the elongation and contraction of the muscle. Those are not able to happen very well. So now you're not able to build as well. So it's important to break those down so the muscle, the fascia can function the way that it needs to. When I explain it like simplicity to clients, I usually like interlace my fingers and I'm like, so here, let me pop up this phone. I had to put it on a charger, but so I will like this, right? So this is how our muscle fibers should align. When we break them down and heal, a lot of times this happens, right? Now we don't have stretch. We don't have the same, our muscle fibers aren't aligned. So when you roll them out, we're trying to return them back to this position. Now we're able to stretch and contract to how we need to, right?
Okay.
So that's why it can really hurt your progress. It can really hurt how your muscle belly looks, because sometimes your body will adapt and it will have that balled up adhesion and it'll work around it. And then the muscle will form actually to be a little bit different around it.
Oh,
the
really?
Other thing that, yes, the other thing that can happen is that once that's not, if there's something in your body that's not working properly, our body is a kinetic chain, which means it's going to move somewhere else. So you can have issues that start in your feet, will move all the way up into your hips because something in your ankle is not working right now. Now something in your calf isn't working right now. Your knee is tight. Now your quad is tight. Your IT band's pulling on your hips. Now your back is hurting because your IT band and your piriformis and your whole hip complex is tight. So now everything is working incorrectly. So the body, unfortunately, because it is a kinetic chain, one thing is off, it will be a spiral of events. And so that's why it's extremely important to not have malmovement patterns, because done over and over and over again over time, that compounds and you end up with multiple issues. You end up with patterns of movement that are incorrect. That will actually translate at a neuromuscular level, because your body is obviously built to protect itself. So if something's hurting, it's going to, do whatever it can to take pressure off that. So it'll
compensate.
It'll compensate, making like maybe a smaller muscle that should be our tertiary muscle working. It'll make it the primary muscle working in that exercise just to make the weight move. Right.
Yeah.
Now you got a problem. It's kind of like an easy example of that is people who have overactive traps and they're doing shoulder raises all day, but their traps are really the prime mover. They're pretty much moving the weight with the traps. Yeah, your shoulders are not going to grow. They're not going to grow. Like,
everybody wants massive traps, anyways, Jen. No,
I would much rather have my shoulders way overshadow my traps, and I'd much rather have it that way. But
no, yeah, and it might depend on what you do too, because as a powerlifter, like my body wants to move everything. It wants to use its largest muscle groups to move weight. So when it comes to my shoulders, I have to learn how to shut off those bigger muscle groups, which I'm learning from a couple different people, to make sure that my shoulders would actually grow and my traps not take over.
Yep. And that's why body work's really important to do too, is because, somebody who sits at a desk and has overactive traps, and honestly, it's going to be very hard for them to not use that, because that is what their body's used to. And like I said, it'll affect your body at a neuromuscular level. So eventually, as your body adapts, when you're like, hey, I need to lift my shoulder, your body communicates as like, and starts using a trap. You know what I mean? It starts to miscommunicate once.
So it almost like you lift this before you ever actually use your shoulder muscles to.
Yeah. And your body now communicates that way. And so that's why, working on a neuromuscular level is important too. And that's another reason to progress through exercises in a certain way is really to train that mind muscle connection and that neuromuscular connectivity with your brain. It's not just about growing muscle. It's about, if you don't have that neuromuscular connection, you're never going to be able to push that muscle to its full potential because your body isn't communicating with it properly.
And then like your body isn't well balanced, and so it may affect the way you ultimately move weight, or it may affect ultimately the way you look on stage if you're a bodybuilder, if you can't get everything to work and grow proportionally, I guess maybe.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. And
that's where a lot of times where injuries happen too.
No, it makes sense in a way for sure, because there's things that I've chased, and I think what a lot of people do is they'll have a pain in a certain part of their body and think like that's where they have to dig in the most, like that's where the problem is. So if you have lower back pain, maybe it has nothing to do with your lower back. Your lower back's just tight and it's causing pain right there, when actually it might have something to do with your hip flexor, I guess, or maybe your piriformis in your glute, or maybe, I don't know, maybe even something down in your calf, or I don't know. I don't know it that well. But yeah, it's like you chase a problem and you keep digging into exactly where it's at when that may not even be where it started.
Yep. And when that happens, you can sometimes cause damage from doing too much to that muscle, thinking that that's the problem, and also not getting to the core problem of that neuromuscular connectivity that has been broken. Like that was a big thing with my back, since I do have some nerve damage from the compression of the disc against my fractures. It was actually really important for me to reconnect my neuromuscularity to my glutes and my hips and stuff like that, because now my body was in such a protection mode because my back, wasn't aligned. And so I've had to work really hard to recreate those communication pathways to certain parts of my body that were being protected because of my back. And that happens a lot. And so it's just really important for longevity. And as far as going about it, I know that some newer research is a little bit more for like dynamic type warming up rather than even rolling sometimes in the beginning. I did my first corrective exercise certification like probably 8 years ago, and it's really kind of interesting how much it's already changed as far as like the information. Like for example, in my NASM corrective exercise book, they literally talked about rolling out the IT bands.
Yeah.
Well, recently they've newer research in the last couple of years, because the IT band is not a muscle and it's a tendon, they realize that's a bad thing, right? So
you're not doing anything to that exactly. Like it's not really going to change anything, right?
No. So you're trying to attack it from above or below. And usually it starts in the hips. Sometimes you've got something going on knee or lower. But you're right as far as the fact that a lot of times that direct spot really isn't the cause. It's usually what's in pain because of whatever is messed up in the kinetic chain.
So beyond, because there's definitely dynamic stretching, I guess. I mean, dynamic movements. Yeah, I don't know if I can consider it stretching. And then static stretching that we're all used to, which is like the most basic thing. Which
I think has its place too.
Yeah.
But one of the things about that, as far as like before and after a workout, is just that your muscles have like their resting length. And if you stretch them beyond that resting length, they can kind of stay like quote unquote stretched out, kind of like a rubber band for a little bit of period of time. So like if you static stretch for a long time before you do a workout, your muscle is not at its resting state. It's an elongated state.
Oh,
and so that can create problems as far as like how long it takes for it to contract. And it may or may not work properly because of that reason. You don't really want it to be stretched out. I know a lot of coaches, well, not recently, I've seen more and more coaches hate on static stretching. I still think it has its place. And in my experience, it's still super important. But I tend to tell people, to do that at a different time of the day. I encourage people to do it like before and after you go to bed, because a lot of people wake up stiff, immediately go to work, and all that kind of stuff. I would say stretching, that kind of stretching is probably better to do at different times of the day, so it doesn't affect your workout, but still important to make sure that you keep that length of those muscles. Because the thing is, a lot of people are sitting these days, and that creates shortened hip flexors, right? And an elongated piriformis. And now you have weak glutes. Well, I wouldn't say weak glutes, but it's a different, the proprioception is different because the lengths are not correct, right? So
they're not in that resting state position.
Yeah, they're in a tightened state now, so it's still important to make sure that they are what they're supposed to be. But like I said, at a different time of the day. So, 15 minutes after you, for 15 minutes after you wake up or before you go to bed or whatever. I static stretch like that. And then I usually dedicate some of my active rest day to doing like some sort of like yoga type stuff. Just great for core, mind, muscle body connection, things like that. And then as far as the dynamic stretching goes, I don't know that that's like the best word for it, but like things that help activate things before you work out. So like, for example, one of the things that has helped me a lot recently is concentrating on some of the internal and external rotations of my hip, and doing different banded exercises before I do my leg day. It has made a significant difference on my form. And just making sure that I have like a good communication of what's going on in my body. And so that's been one of the things that I've been focusing on. Is I wouldn't necessarily call them activation exercises, but kind of in a way that's what they are. It's kind of like when you would do box jumps before a deadlift. That's to help with the power in the hips. Now you've activated that power in the hips. And then see if I can think of another example. Well,
basically it sounds like you're trying to, like, the dynamic movements are like stimulating the muscles that you're going to use through your workout, kind of thing, rather than stretching them just because you're stiff, thinking that that's going to somehow help your movements.
Yeah, and they also, I think, play an integral role in using some of those smaller stabilizing muscles that you're not able to concentrate on during a compound movement, right? So I'm working on some of those hip stabilizers with the band that I'm not really like focused on when I'm squatting. So I'm building them so my hips are more stable, so it supports my squats. It's like priming myself for that movement.
Yeah, well, and that makes sense. And beyond like these things that you would do, maybe depending on your sport or whatever your goals are, if you have static stretching more if like you're a gymnast or a runner, or just do yoga, or yoga almost seems like to me like almost just stretching, but it is difficult. But so maybe it has to do with whatever it is what your training style is too. But beyond this type of stuff, I know that you do a bunch of different therapies that are, for recovery.
Yes.
I love heat. I love sauna after my workouts, which would also be a form of recovery too.
Yes.
So what do you think of these types of things? Like, what are the things that that are beneficial? What are the things that maybe people don't know as much about outside of static stretching?
So a lot of those recovery methods can help like break up lactic acid. It can help detoxify the body, like the sauna, obviously. And it can also help reduce inflammation, which a lot of people have a lot of issues with that.
That's a big one, right?
Yeah. So like some of the therapies that I do, I use infrared light a lot, so there's red light, which goes to the second dermis layer of the skin and will help like with collagen production, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But an infrared light actually heats from like the inside out. And so it does get down to the bone. It gets down all the way. Yeah, it hits the nerves, the bones, everything. And so it can help decrease inflammation quite significantly. For example, what I use at Elevate Mind Body Studios is called a cocoon. And it kind of looks like a spaceship that you go in and your head pokes out of it. You should come there. I'll get you a pass. You can come and explore.
Yes.
It runs off of infrared heat. And so like a lot of people will use it like for fibromyalgia or their arthritis, or for me, because my back was inflamed, I would use it to reduce the inflammation in my back so I could go work out. Because it would just help. It would be like it's like, a natural way to reduce pain, instead of taking ibuprofen or something like that. I would just reduce the inflammation, for the temporary period, really. But over time, it compounds, and you can really tell the difference of how much inflammation is in your body. Mm-hmm. In fact, one thing that's interesting about that is I'm a stress monster. I don't relax ever. Yeah, it's a problem. But so when I started going to Elevate, I wasn't really tracking my food. I wasn't really doing cardio. I wasn't really doing anything extreme. And I will say that mental recovery is really important too, because when I started going there, I didn't change anything. My food, my workouts, nothing. And just because I went consistently there like 3 or 4 times a week, a month later, I was like, man, I'm looking, pretty good or whatever. I get on the scale and I'm 10 pounds lighter.
Wow.
I'm like, what the hell? Like, I was shocked. I hadn't changed really anything, but I felt so much better. And I just didn't have like all this extra inflammation, extra water going on in my body. And I'm telling you, it is almost psychotically crazy how well your body responds when you start helping it out a little bit, I guess. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I didn't change a single thing except for mentally, I was feeling better about myself because I was doing something for myself every day. And 2, I was doing all these therapies to reduce inflammation, to increase sweat. So like the other thing I like to go in there is called the hot box. Mm-hmm. And it's like
sounds like shady. I've heard hot box in one way.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. Or I guess I call it the hot box, I guess. I think technically it's called the Red Fit room.
Okay.
But
not weed related, right?
Not weed related. No, it's red. So they have infrared lights inside, and they have Himalayan salts on the wall to help open up your lungs. And the room is usually between 135 and 140 degrees. And I like to stretch in there because obviously when it's warm, you can get into a deeper stretch because the muscles are warm, but also you're going to sweat out like literally pounds of water. It's insane. Like, mm-hmm. It's just, if you actually like work in there, I usually do like yoga in there, and I do hard yoga. So like, I like vinyasa yoga, which is like that flowing yoga where you're going to go through, a push up and a downward dog before every single movement that you do, basically. Right. So you're going through flow. But anyways, you'll sweat like crazy. And I'm telling you, it is wild how you'll step out of that and just feel 10 pounds lighter and just incredible. It's incredible. You can kind of do the same thing in the cocoon. They have things there where you can get in a little sauna suit and get into the cocoon. I literally will come out of there, and like the sauna suit has like the little feet, parts for your feet or whatever to go in, because it's like a plastic bag, and then you put like a little sauna suit over it.
Oh, Jesus.
Literally have had puddles this high of water under my feet. It's disgusting.
So gross. You can handle how disgusting it is.
A little gross, but it's incredible. You feel so good afterwards. It's incredible. And I obviously don't do that a lot, but I try to do it, like once a week, once every 2 weeks, just kind of refresh, detoxify, get some of whatever crap out. And ever since I started doing that, like my body has been cooperating a lot better for me. And I'm the kind of person who doesn't really, previous to this, didn't really believe in a lot of that kind of stuff, like light therapies and things like that. But after consistently using it over periods of time, I am a firm believer in just reducing inflammation in the body, and then just like mentally going into regularly taking care of yourself. It's hard to explain, but having that mental shift of, instead of being like every day being like, man, I should go do this, man, I should go do this, man, I should be stretching, man, going in and like being there and being like, I'm doing this for myself, and feeling good about it and feeling accomplished, and then also working with your body, it just, everything kind of starts to come together that way.
I'm not as good at this either. I think I overanalyze life a little too much, but and maybe it's also a byproduct of like these physical therapies, but the mental therapy that you get from these things, just de-stressing and like bringing down cortisol levels, it seems to do a lot for your body too. Like I can sit in a sauna and just be there and just like pay attention to my breath. And every time I step out, which is probably largely part to the heat, but I feel cleaner. Like my body feels like it's released something, like I've gotten something out. And I think part of that too is I've been able to just not think so fucking hard, like not be in a moment of constant stress.
Be still.
Yeah. And it's almost like the mental part of these things too are a recovery almost.
Yep. I agree. I would attribute, like I said, partly it being just therapies themselves, but I think the mental health that I gained from regularly doing these therapies made my recovery all that much better. Like it's inexplicable to me. And that's why I literally take people to Elevate all the time. I use it as a like a tool for my clients sometimes, like if they're super stressed, or like they are like, I use it as an incentive sometimes for them to hit goals. I'm like, hey, let's hit some goals here. We'll go to Elevate. We can get you into a massage chair and get you into that cocoon, let you relax, let you recover and things like that. And so ever since I've really experienced it, the wealth of wellness is truly priceless.
No, I think this is something that is very easy to ignore, because the physical part and the nutritional part, it's the action thing. Like that's what we're doing all the time anyways, especially in American culture. Like we're just chasing. And I think it's getting harder and harder for us to slow down and balance that out. And so maybe that's why recovery is so hard when it comes to our training, is because it's that much more difficult to pause and to not be on the go and to not be thinking about our next move. I know it's very, very difficult for me.
Yep. I agree. And so that's why I said, like, part of the recovery process now is mental. And that's why, like, even with clients these days, I'll put into their schedule, hey, this week I want you to hit this many self-care days. If I feel like
that's good,
that's something that they're lacking and it's affecting their training because they're not taking care of themselves or they don't feel like they're taking care of themselves, then you best believe I'm going to start scheduling that into your training because that affects your training. You know, if you're not feeling taken care of mentally, everything's going to fall apart eventually.
Yeah. There's only so much pressure you can put on there.
Yeah. And so I have started to kind of make that as part of people's recovery, you know, especially like busy moms, sometimes, you know, people who are used to having to put other people before them, like their kids and stuff like that. They have a hard time taking a step back and thinking, hey, I can't pour from an empty glass. So I need to refill this glass before I come back to this, because otherwise, ultimately, at the end of the day, you're doing everybody a disservice by not taking care of yourself, right? Mentally. So that's why I have created it as being kind of a focus for some of my clients, especially who struggle in that, because it will affect your training to some degree. It'll affect your discipline. It'll affect how you feel about yourself. It'll affect how you feel about your training. It'll affect how you feel physically, mentally. It'll affect how you interact with people around you. And ultimately, over time, you know, compounded, if that's negative, you're going to have a negative experience. And so it's important to compound a positivity in your fitness and training environment in order for you to maintain it. And so I think a part of that is making sure that your mental health is being taken care of just as much as your physical.
So we've covered like this trifecta thing. I kind of like it because it's all kind of come together and like this balance of all the things necessary to be good at fucking physical health. Like it all kind of encompasses, I guess. Do you think there's anything that we miss, is something that really needs to be known that people that maybe we haven't covered yet? It'd be pretty good.
I think the thing that people have the hardest time sometimes with is making sure that they set their expectations correctly and just their perception of things. You know, your perception is everything. And so I think that when somebody goes into any sort of training, nutrition, really anything that they're trying to accomplish, they need to learn how to set their expectations correctly, whether that is their short-term and long-term goals need to be attainable. And then they also need to go into something with the perception of it being a good thing for them. You know, when people go into training or nutrition with a negative attitude, or this is a chore, or I have to do this because my doctor said so, you're setting yourself up for failure. So as far as like, I think most people, or I think a lot of people fail training mentally more than physically in pretty much every aspect. That's why it's sometimes a lot easier to train in-person clients, because it's easier to become attuned to their mental health versus somebody who's online. So I guess the main thing is that understanding that all of this, all of your physical activity, everything that you're trying to accomplish really comes down to your mental state and making sure that you take care of that. And I think that that's a integral piece that a lot of people fail to have and don't have before they get started. And so then they fail.
So you have to come into this knowing the good and knowing that this is something that you want to do, that you know is good for you in an overall perspective, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, Jen, where is the best place for everybody to find you so they can take in all your fucking knowledge?
Easiest place, probably Instagram. That's what I'm on the most, and that would be Jenn Dees Fitness or Jenn Dees Fit. And then I also have my email address is jenndeesfitness@gmail.com. clients can contact me that way as well, or people can ask me questions through there. I also have a TikTok, which is Jenn Dees. I occasionally am on there. Facebook,
TikTok's a
again,
beast of us.
It's horrible. It's horrible. It really is. But you know what?
Yeah.
I had to start it because I had somebody recording my videos for my stories and posting them on TikTok. And so I made a TikTok and proved it was me, so they would take that down as it being them. Yeah.
That seems to be happening a lot.
Yeah. So I need to have a presence on here so people like know who I am. So if people start stealing my stuff, like I have a source that it's coming from. And TikTok, it's something else. But anyways, you can find me on there occasionally too on Facebook. And then I also am under Jennifer Dees in the Trainerize app as well. That's where I accept clients now, and I can give you the link to that.
Trainerized, okay.
Yeah, it's the app that I use for my clients now because it's very organizational and it keeps them at basically it's kind of like a social media app during the day for me because I get to see a feed of what my clients are doing. It'll tell me when they complete workouts. It syncs to their watches and their phones, so I can see like how much sleep they're getting, how many steps they're getting. Yeah, I watch you.
Advanced.
You know? Yeah, it's really nice because it makes me it truly makes me make them be accountable because I'm literally it syncs to their food log so I can watch them log their food during the day. So it's truly a way for me to keep people accountable for what they're doing.
No, yeah, that's like it's like God's over your shoulder. That's crazy.
I mean, they call me Satan usually, but yeah.
Well, some sort of God. That's fucking amazing. Okay, Jenn, this is a fantastic 2.0. Thank you for being here. It was super, super awesome. Everybody, thanks for being on the RMP. I hope you guys enjoyed this 2.0 with Jenn Dees. I put all of her stuff in the show notes. Thanks for everybody being here. Again, thanks, Jenn, for coming. Stay strong and stay open-minded. I'm your host, Zach. Out.
Bye.
Hey guys, I hope that all things we've brought here, including the people, have helped you change the way that you see the world. And if it has, then it would help us so much if you leave a rating and a comment on iTunes or give any feedback wherever you listen to the RMP. Thank you for listening in, and don't forget to follow and subscribe. Question everything, my friends.
Feeling you can get in a gym, or the most satisfying feeling you can get in a gym, is the pump. Let's say you train your biceps, blood is rushing into your muscles, and that's what we call a pump. Your muscles get a really tight feeling, like your skin is going to explode any moment. It's really tight. It's like somebody blowing air into your muscle. It just blows up, and it feels different. It feels fantastic. Satisfying for me as coming is. As having sex with a woman and coming. So can you believe how much I am in heaven? I'm like getting the feeling of coming in the gym. I'm getting the feeling of coming at home. I'm getting the feeling of coming backstage when I pump up. When I pose out in front of 5,000 people, I get the same feeling. So I'm coming day and night. That's terrific, right? So, I'm in heaven.